Hello everyone and welcome back to Shadow Man Stories. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now, let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Vincent Maddox, but everyone calls me Vinny. I've been a park ranger for 12 years now, working the Cherokee National Forest in Tennessee. Before that, I was an Army medic in Korea. Seen plenty of death, plenty of things that don't make sense, but nothing prepared me for what happened at Skull Hollow in October of 1963. I was 35 then, living with my mother in a small cabin near the park headquarters. She worried about me being alone in those woods, said I spent too much time with dead animals and not enough with living people. She wasn't wrong. I'd rather cut open a deer carcass than make small talk at church. Animals make sense. They follow rules. Get sick, die, get eaten. Simple. That Tuesday morning started like any other. I was in my makeshift lab, really just a shed behind the ranger station, doing an autopsy on a white-tail buck. Hunters had found it acting strange before it died. Stumbling around, not afraid of humans, making weird clicking sounds with its teeth. The moment I opened that deer up, I knew something was wrong. Inside its chest cavity, wrapped around the heart like silver wire, were these thin threads. Not worms or parasites I'd ever seen. They looked almost metallic, catching the light from my work lamp. When I touched one with my scalpel, it moved. Not the way a dead thing moves when you poke it. It moved like it was alive and angry. I'd published 3 papers on wildlife diseases for the Tennessee Department of Health, knew every parasite, every infection that could hit local game. These things didn't exist in any textbook. I was still staring at those silver threads when my radio crackled to life. "Vinny, you there? We got a situation up at the Skull Hollow Lodge." That was Sheriff Tom Bradley. Good man, but he only called me for 2 things. Poaching problems or weird animal behavior. "What kind of situation, Tom?" "The kind where you need to get up here with your medical bag. We got 5 hunters, all alive, but..." His voice trailed off. "Just get up here and bring that camera of yours." Skull Hollow was a private hunting preserve 15 miles deep in the forest. Rich folks from Nashville came up to shoot trophy deer and pretend they were frontiersmen. The lodge owner, Pete Hammond, paid good money to stock his land with big bucks and keep poachers away. The drive took me 40 minutes on winding dirt roads. By the time I reached the lodge, the sun was getting low, casting long shadows between the oak trees. Sheriff Bradley's cruiser sat in the circular drive, along with an ambulance and Dr. Sarah Klein's station wagon. Sarah was the only doctor within 50 miles who knew wildlife medicine. We'd worked together on several cases, rabid foxes, diseased bears, that sort of thing. Smart woman, real professional. If she was here, this was serious. I found them all on the lodge's back porch. 5 men in hunting gear, sitting in rocking chairs, all moving in perfect time. Rock forward, rock back, rock forward, rock back. Their eyes were open, staring straight ahead, but nobody was home. "Jesus Christ," I whispered. "Been doing that for 3 hours, Sheriff Bradley said. "Found them this morning at their campsite, all sitting around their dead fire, rocking like babies. Won't respond to nothing, not food, not loud noises, not even when we move them into these chairs." Dr. Klein looked up from where she was checking one hunter's pulse. Her usually neat blonde hair was messy, and her face was pale. "Vinny, thank God you're here. I need another medical opinion. This is beyond anything I've seen." I knelt down next to the nearest hunter, a heavy-set man in expensive camouflage. His eyes tracked the movement of tree branches in the wind, but when I waved my hand in front of his face, not "Hang." His pulse was steady, breathing normal, but his skin felt cold. "Any idea what could cause this?" I asked Sarah. "I've run every test I can think of. No signs of poisoning, no head trauma, no obvious neurological damage. But look at this." She lifted the man's hand. His fingers were twitching in a precise pattern. Tap, 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 tap. They're all doing it, she said. The exact same finger pattern at the exact same time. I looked down the line of hunters. Sure enough, 5 different men, all tapping out the same rhythm with their right hands while rocking in perfect sync. It's like they're... I started to say, then stopped. Like they're what? Like they're all connected to the same radio signal. That's when Pete Hammond came out of the lodge carrying a cup of coffee with shaking hands. Pete was usually a loud, friendly man who talked too much and laughed too loud. Now he looked like he'd seen a ghost. "Any change?" he asked quietly. "No change," Sarah replied. "Pete, I need to ask again. What exactly did these men eat yesterday? Drink? Any unusual activities?" "Same as always. Lodge dinner, some whiskey, early to bed. They went out to the South Ridge before dawn, came back acting normal around noon, ate lunch, took a nap, then..." Pete gestured helplessly at the rocking men. "Then what?" I pressed. "Then they all got up at the exact same time, walked outside, sat down, and started rocking. Haven't said a word since." I was about to ask another question when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. In the fading daylight, I could see a faint shimmer under each man's skin, like silver threads just below the surface. The same silver threads I'd found in the deer. "Sarah, I need to show you something," I said, pulling her aside. "Back at my lab, I've got a deer with some kind of unknown parasite. Silver-looking threads wrapped around its organs." Her eyes went wide. "Are you thinking what I'm thinking? That these men might be infected with the same thing?" "Yeah." We convinced Sheriff Bradley to let us take one of the hunters back to the medical clinic in town. The heavyset man, his wallet said his name was Robert Chen, a banker from Nashville, didn't resist when we helped him into the ambulance. He kept rocking even on the stretcher, even with the vehicle bouncing on rough roads. At the clinic, Sarah had better equipment, X-rays, blood testing, the works. What we found made both of us question our sanity. The X-rays showed thin, wire-like structures throughout Chen's body. Not just in his blood, wrapped around his spine, threaded through his brain tissue, coiled around his heart. But here's the impossible part. The structures weren't showing up as organic matter. They looked metallic on the X-ray, like someone had injected him with liquid silver. "This can't be right," Sarah muttered, adjusting the X-ray machine. "Parasites don't show up metallic. They're biological." But the blood tests were even stranger. Under the microscope, Chen's blood looked normal at first. Red cells, white cells, platelets. But every few seconds, all the cells would suddenly align in perfect rows like soldiers marching. Then they'd go back to normal random movement. Then align again. "It's like something is giving them orders," I said. Sarah was quiet for a long time, staring through the microscope. Finally, she looked up. "Vinny, in all your wildlife disease research, have you ever seen anything that can control animal behavior?" "You mean like rabies making animals aggressive?" "Sure." "No, I mean actually control behavior. Make animals do specific things, move in specific patterns." I thought about it. There are some fungi that can control insects. Make ants climb to high places before they die, so the fungus can spread its spores. But that's insects, not mammals, and certainly not humans. What if it's not biological? "What do you mean?" Sarah pulled up a chair next to me. "What if these silver threads aren't alive in the way we understand life? What if there's something else entirely?" Before I could answer, we heard a commotion from the examination room. We rushed back to find Robert. Chen standing up, perfectly still, his eyes focused on the far wall. His mouth was moving, but no sound was coming out. Then, clear as day, we heard his voice. "The stone-coat giant walks again. The hungry one returns." But his lips hadn't moved with the words. Sarah and I looked at each other in horror. The voice was coming from somewhere else in the building. We followed the sound to the waiting room where we found the clinic's janitor, old Frank Morrison, standing in the exact same position as Chen. Same pose, same blank stare, and his mouth was moving in perfect sync with the words we were hearing. "The stone-coat giant walks again. The hungry one returns." "Frank?" Sarah called out. "Frank, can you hear me?" But Frank kept talking, and we realized the voice was coming from both men at once, speaking in perfect unison. "Feed us, feed us, feed us." That's when Sarah started screaming, not because of what the men were saying, but because she was looking down at her own hands. Under her skin, just barely visible, silver threads were spreading up from her fingertips like infection in her veins. "It's in me," she whispered. "Oh God, it's in me." I grabbed her shoulders. "Sarah, listen to me. When did it start? When did you first notice?" I don't know. Maybe an hour ago?" My hands felt tingly when I was taking Chen's blood. She looked up at me with panic in her eyes. "Vinny, what if it spreads through contact? What if touching the infected blood—" She didn't finish the sentence because she didn't need to. I'd been handling that deer carcass with my bare hands. I'd touched Chen when we moved him. I'd been exposed just as much as she had. I looked down at my own hands. Nothing yet. But I could feel a strange tingling in my fingertips, like they were falling asleep. "We need to get back to the lodge," I said. "If this thing is spreading, Pete Hammond and Sheriff B. Radley might be infected too." The drive back to Skull Hollow felt like the longest 40 minutes of my life. Sarah sat in the passenger seat, holding her hands up to the dashboard light, watching the silver threads spread slowly up her arms. She was still herself, still talking, still thinking clearly, but I could see the fear in her eyes. "Tell me about Cherokee legends," she said suddenly. "You mentioned stone coat giants. What are those?" I'd grown up hearing stories from old Cherokee folks who still lived in the area. My grandfather used to trade with them, learned some of their language. The Cherokee called them Nun-yu-nu-wi, giants with stone skin that couldn't be hurt by arrows or knives. They were cannibals, but they didn't just eat human flesh. They ate human minds, human souls. How were they defeated? According to legend, they were tricked into jumping into a deep pit, then buried under tons of rock. But the stories say they're not really dead, just sleeping. Sarah was quiet for a moment. What if the legends are real? What if these silver things are how the stone coat giant actually works? Not one big monster, but millions of tiny controllers that can take over other creatures. When we reached the lodge, we found Sheriff Bradley's cruiser still in the driveway, but something was wrong. The 5 hunters were no longer rocking in their chairs. They were standing in a perfect line, facing the forest, completely motionless. Pete Hammond was standing with them. So was Sheriff Bradley. All 7 men, different heights and builds, standing in identical poses with their arms at their sides and their heads tilted slightly to the left. "Tom," I called out. "Pete." They turned toward us in perfect synchronization, like dancers following choreography. Their eyes were the same blank stare we'd seen before, but now their mouths were moving together, speaking in unison. "Welcome home, Vincent Maddox. We've been waiting for you." The worst part wasn't that 7 grown men were speaking to me in the same voice. The worst part was that the voice sounded like my own mother. "Mom," I whispered, my blood turning to ice water. Sarah grabbed my arm. "Vinny, that's not your mother. It's the infection. It's trying to confuse you." But the men kept talking in my mother's voice, and what they said made my knees go weak. "Vincent, honey, come inside. I made your favorite cornbread, the kind with honey, just like when you were little." Only my mother knew I liked cornbread with honey. Only she called me Vincent when she was being sweet. "It's reading your memories," Sarah said urgently. "Whatever this thing is, it can access what people know, what they remember." The infected men started walking toward us, still in perfect formation. I pulled Sarah back toward our truck, but she stumbled. When I looked at her, I saw why. The silver threads had spread all the way up to her shoulders now, and her left eye was starting to get that same blank look. "Sarah, stay with me. Fight it." "I'm trying, but it's so hard to think clearly. It's like trying to remember a dream while you're falling asleep." Her voice was getting softer, more distant. "Vinny, you need to know something." While we were driving back, I remembered more about my examination of Chen. The silver threads. They're not just in his blood and organs. They've replaced parts of his nervous system. His brain is wired differently now. What does that mean? It means the thing controlling him isn't just influencing his behavior. It is his behavior. The real Robert Chen might already be dead, and these threads are just puppeting his body. The 7 infected men had formed a semicircle around our truck. In the darkness, I could see more figures moving between the trees. Lodge staff, maybe. Other hunters, all walking with that same synchronized step. "We need to get out of here," I said, starting the engine. But when I put the truck in reverse, I heard Sarah make a soft, gasping sound. I looked over and saw her hands moving without her control, reaching for the gear shift. "Don't let me," she whispered. "I can't stop my hands." I grabbed her wrists, holding them away from the controls, and gunned the engine. The truck shot backward, scattering the infected men, and I spun us around toward the main road. In the rearview mirror, I watched the lodge disappear into darkness, but not before I saw something that made my skin crawl. All the infected people, maybe 20 or 30 by now, had turned to watch us leave. And they were all waving goodbye in exactly the same way, with exactly the same timing. "Sarah, how long do we have before you're completely gone?" She was fighting to keep her right eye focused on me while her left eye stared straight ahead. "I don't know, maybe an hour, maybe less. The infection is moving faster now, like it's learning how to spread more efficiently. Is there anything we can do? Any way to stop it? I'm still a doctor, even with half my brain hijacked. From what I can tell, these silver threads are replacing neural tissue. If we could remove them surgically, could you operate on yourself? With your help, maybe. But we'd need to be fast, and we'd need the right equipment." I made a decision that probably saved both our lives. Instead of heading back to town where the infection might spread to more people, I drove to my grandfather's old hunting cabin deep in the woods. It was isolated, stocked with basic medical supplies, and most importantly, it had a shortwave radio. The cabin hadn't been used in 2 years, but the generator still worked. While I got the lights on, Sarah sat at the kitchen table, staring at her hands. The silver threads had reached her neck now, and when she tried to speak, sometimes different words came out than what she intended. "We need to operate soon," she said, then immediate, really after in a completely different tone. "Vincent, come back to the lodge. Your mother is worried about you." "That's not me talking," she added quickly. "It's the thing in my head." Found my grandfather's medical kit. He'd been a field medic in World War I, kept his tools clean and sharp. Along with Sarah's supplies from the clinic, we had enough for basic surgery. "Walk me through it," I said. "What do I need to do?" Sarah's right hand pointed to her left shoulder. "The threads are thickest here, where they first entered my system. If we can cut them out before they reach my heart and brain." But as she was explaining the procedure, her left hand started moving on its own, reaching for the radio. "Stop me," she said. I grabbed her wrist, but she was surprisingly strong. The infection was making her body more powerful, more coordinated. With her right hand, she pointed to a roll of medical tape. "Tie me down. Do it now before I can't help you anymore." I strapped Sarah to the chair with tape around her wrists and ankles. She guided me through sterilizing the scalpel and preparing the wound area. But just as I was about to make the first incision, she looked at me with both eyes, one normal, one infected, and said something that stopped me cold. "Vinny, what if removing the infection kills me? What if these threads are keeping me alive now, like a life support system?" I paused with the blade an inch from her skin. "Are you saying that as Sarah, or as the infection trying to stop me?" I honestly don't know anymore. That's when we heard the engines. Through the cabin windows, I could see headlights moving through the forest, multiple vehicles coming from different directions. The infected people from the lodge had found us. "They're tracking the radio signal," Sarah said. "Or maybe they're tracking me directly through these things in my blood." The first truck pulled up outside, and I recognized Sheriff Bradley's voice calling out, "Vinny, we know you're in there. We just want to help Sarah. She needs medical attention." But it wasn't Riet. Ellie Tom's voice. It was that same unified tone we'd heard before, just using Tom's vocal cords. "Don't listen to them," Sarah whispered. "Cut the threads out. Do it now." I pressed the scalpel to her shoulder and made the first incision. Dark blood welled up, but mixed in with it were those silver threads, writhing like angry worms. The moment I cut the first one, Sarah screamed. Not a human scream, something electronic, like feedback from a radio. And outside, every infected person screamed at exactly the same time. The screaming stopped abruptly, and the silence was somehow worse. I kept working, cutting out silver threads while Sarah gritted her teeth. Each thread I removed made her more herself, but it also made the infected people outside more agitated. "They don't like this," she gasped. "Whatever controls them, it's angry that I'm breaking free." Through the window, I could see shapes moving in the darkness, not walking anymore, crawling on all fours, moving with an inhuman speed and coordination that made my skin crawl. "Sarah, I need you to explain something to me. You said these things replace neural tissue. But what are they really? Where did they come from?" She was lucid now, the infection mostly cut away from her shoulder and arm. "I think they're not from Earth, Vinny. I think there's some kind of ancient technology that's been dormant underground for centuries, maybe millennia." "Technology? But they move like they're alive. What if the line between technology and biology doesn't exist for whatever made these things? What if they're machines that grow and reproduce like organisms?" A loud crash came from the back of the cabin. Something was trying to break in through the rear door. I grabbed my grandfather's hunting rifle from the wall. "Keep cutting," Sarah said. "I can feel more threads near my spine. If they reach my brainstem, I'll be gone forever." I worked as fast as I could while keeping one eye on the doors and windows. The infected people weren't trying to be sneaky anymore. They were testing the cabin's defenses, looking for weak points like a military unit planning an assault. "There's something else," Sarah said as I dug another cluster of silver threads from her neck. While I was partially infected, I could sense what they were thinking. "It's not just random control, Vinny. There's a purpose behind it." "What kind of purpose?" "They're building something. All the infected people are working together on some kind of construction project. I saw flashes of it in my mind. They're digging deep underground, following cave systems, excavating something large." The front window exploded inward, and Sheriff Bradley's body came crawling through the broken glass. But the way he moved wasn't human anymore. His arms and legs bent at impossible angles, and his head turned completely around to look at us while his body faced the other direction. I shot him twice in the chest. He didn't even slow down. "The bullets won't stop them," Sarah said. "The infection has made their bodies into tools. They don't feel pain, don't need normal body functions." Bradley's corpse, because that's what it was now, a corpse being driven by alien technology, lunged toward me with fingernails grown into claws. I dodged and hit it with the rifle butt, knocking it down, but immediately heard more glass breaking from other windows. "Sarah, whatever these things are building underground, how do we stop it?" "Fire," she said immediately. "I saw that in the infected memories, too. The silver threads are vulnerable to high temperatures. That's why the Cherokee legends talk about the stone-coat giants being defeated by being buried. Not because burial killed them, but because it cut them off from the surface where they could find fuel to burn." Pete Hammond came through the back door, moving on his hands and feet like a spider. His mouth was open, impossibly wide, and silver threads were hanging from his teeth like metallic sash. Aliva. When he spoke, his voice was a chorus of every infected person speaking at once. "Vincent Maddox, you have interfered with the awakening. You have damaged our network. But you cannot escape. We know where you live. We know everyone you care about." "My mother," I whispered in horror. The thing wearing Pete's body smiled with too many teeth. "She is already one of us. She has been one of us since yesterday morning, when she found the deer you brought home for examination." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. The deer carcass I'd taken home to show Mom. She'd helped me carry it to the shed, had gotten blood on her hands. "You're lying. Call her. Use the radio. Hear for yourself." With shaking hands, I turned on the shortwave radio and called my mother's emergency frequency. Her voice came through immediately, calm and cheerful. "Hello, Vincent, honey. I'm fine. Everything's fine here. Why don't you come home? I'm making cornbread." The same words the infected men at the lodge had used. "Mom, if you're really okay, tell me something only you would know. Tell me what you called me when I had nightmares as a kid." A pause. Then, "I called you my brave little soldier." My heart sank. She'd never called me that. When I had nightmares, she used to sing me an old Cherokee lullaby her grandmother had taught her. The infection could access her memories, but it couldn't access mine. Sarah was working on the last of the silver threads in her own neck, cutting them out with a pair of tweezers. "Vinny, we need to get to the source. Whatever they're digging up, we have to destroy it before it fully awakens." "How do we find it?" "The cave system under Skull Hollow. That's where they're all heading. If we can get there first, maybe we can cause a cave-in, bury the source again." The infected bodies in the cabin were moving slower now, like they were losing coordination. And with Sarah partially free of the infection, maybe the network was disrupted. "Can you walk?" "I think so. But Vinny, there's something else you need to know. Those silver threads I cut, out of myself, they're still moving. And I think they're trying to find a new host." I looked down at the pile of writhing metal threads on the floor, then at my own hands. My fingertips were starting to tingle again. "We need to move, now." We climbed out through the broken back window and ran for the truck. Behind us I could hear the infected people regrouping, their coordination returning. But we had a head start, and I knew these woods better than anyone. The drive to Skull Hollow's cave system took us past the lodge, which was now completely dark except for a strange pulsing glow coming from the basement. As we passed, I saw lines of infected people walking in single file toward the caves, carrying tools and supplies. "They've been working all night," Sarah said, "building something or uncovering something." When we reached the cave entrance, we could hear it, a sound like a massive heartbeat echoing up from deep underground. And with each beat, every silver thread Sarah had cut from her body pulsed with light. The thing down there was calling its pieces home. The cave entrance was bigger than I remembered from my childhood. What used to be a narrow opening had been widened into a tunnel large enough for trucks. Fresh excavation marks covered the walls, and I could see electric lights strung deep into the darkness. "They've been busy," Sarah whispered. We crept down the tunnel, following the electric cables and that rhythmic heartbeat sound. The walls were covered with Cherokee petroglyphs, ancient warnings that nobody had been able to read for generations. But now, with silver threads pulsing in the light, the rock carvings almost seemed to move, telling a story of something buried long ago. The tunnel opened into a massive underground chamber that took my breath away. It was like a natural cathedral with stone formations reaching up hundreds of feet. But what dominated the space was the thing they'd been digging up. It looked like a machine, but grown rather than built. Silver threads, thick as tree branches, formed a complex web around something central that pulsed with that heartbeat rhythm. The infected people, I could see maybe 100 of them now, were working in perfect coordination, connecting new silver threads to the main structure, feeding it with their own bodies. "Jesus Christ," I breathed. "How long has this thing been down here?" "Long enough to become part of Cherokee legend," Sarah said. "Look at the rock formations around it. This chamber was sealed deliberately, probably centuries ago." The heartbeat was getting faster, and the silver threads were glowing brighter. Whatever this thing was, it was close to fully awakening. "We need explosives," I said. "Something to cause a cave-in big enough to bury this thing again. The lodge keeps dynamite for stump removal. Pete showed me where it's stored." But as we turned to leave, we heard my mother's voice echoing through the chamber. "Vincent? Vincent, honey, where are you?" She was down there, among the infected, but I couldn't see her in the crowd of people working around the machine. "Don't look for her," Sarah warned. "That's not your mother anymore. That's the thing using her voice to trap you." But I couldn't help myself. I scanned the faces in the crowd until I found her. She was standing near the machine's base, silver threads growing from her hands into the main structure. When she saw me, she smiled and waved. "Come down here, Vincent. I want to show you something wonderful, something that will make you understand." The machine's heartbeat was syncing with my own pulse now, and I could feel the silver threads I'd been exposed to responding, trying to pull me toward the chamber floor. "Fight it," Sarah said, grabbing my arm. "We need to get those explosives now." Getting back to the lodge took forever. The silver threads in my system were getting stronger, making my thoughts fuzzy and my movements sluggish. Sarah had to drive while I fought to stay conscious. The dynamite was exactly where Pete had said it would be, in a locked shed behind the lodge. We took as much as we could carry, along with blasting caps and timer fuses. "How much time do we have?" Sarah asked as we rigged the explosives. "Maybe 20 minutes before I'm completely gone," I said. My left hand was starting to move without my permission, tapping out that same rhythm all the infected people used. We placed charges at strategic points around the cave entrance and along the support pillars in the main chamber. The infected people ignored us completely. They were too focused on their work with the machine, which was now pulsing so brightly it hurt to look at. "Sarah," I said, as we prepared to light the fuses, "if I don't make it out of here, you need to know something. This thing, whatever it is, it's not just local. Those silver threads, they're like seeds. Every infected person who dies spreads more of them into the soil, into the water table. Are you saying this could spread beyond Cherokee National Forest? I'm saying it probably already has. Think about it. How many hunters come through here every year? How many go home to other states, other countries?" We lit the fuses and ran for the cave entrance. Behind us, the machine's heartbeat was becoming a roar, and I could hear the infected people all speaking in unison, their voices echoing through the chamber like a choir. The explosion shook the entire mountain. Rocks fell like rain, and the cave entrance collapsed in a cloud of dust and debris. When the dust settled, there was only a pile of rubble where the tunnel had been. But the sound, that heartbeat rhythm, was still coming from deep underground. "We didn't kill it," Sarah said. "We just buried it again. Maybe that's enough. Maybe that's all we can do." The government cleanup team arrived 2 days later. They said, there had been a gas leak at the lodge, followed by an explosion. All the missing people were presumed dead, buried in the cave-in. The official report blamed a faulty propane system. Sarah and I never talked about what we'd really seen. She took a job in Atlanta, as far from Cherokee National Forest as she could get. I was transferred to a desk job in Nashville, officially a promotion, unofficially a way to keep me away from field work. But sometimes, late at night, I catch myself tapping my fingers in that same rhythm. And sometimes, when I'm in crowds, I notice other people doing it too. The same pattern, the same timing. The silver threads are still out there, still spreading, still waiting for the right moment to wake their master again. I've tried to warn people, but who would believe a story like this? All I can do is watch and wait, and hope that when the thing under Skull Hollow finally breaks free, someone will be ready to bury it again. Because next time, I don't think 20 minutes and a few sticks of dynamite will be enough. The hungry one is patient, but it's not sleeping anymore. And sometimes in my dreams, I can still hear my mother's voice calling me home. My name is Mnemonic Blackthorn, but everyone just calls me Memo. I've been a ranger for 23 years, and in that time, I thought I'd seen everything the Daniel Boone National Forest could throw at me. Lost hikers, bear attacks, even the occasional meth lab hidden in the deep woods. But nothing prepared me for what I found in the limestone maze they call Widow's Web. I should tell you up front, I'm not just any ranger. I have a PhD in psychology, and I specialize in something most people find pretty weird. Helping people remember things they've forgotten. Traumatic memories, mostly. The FBI calls me in sometimes when witnesses can't recall what they saw during violent crimes. Memory is my thing. It's what I do. What I understand better than anyone else in these mountains. That's why they brought me the Hartley case in September of 1991. The Hartley family, mom, dad, 2 teenage kids, had gone hiking in the Red River Gorge area. They were experienced outdoor people, not the type to panic or get themselves into trouble. When they didn't return to their campsite by nightfall, the local search and rescue team went looking. They found all 4 of them sitting by the entrance to a cave system, staring at nothing. completely unresponsive. "It's the damnedest thing I've ever seen," Sheriff Morrison told me when he called. "They're not hurt, not a scratch on them, but it's like somebody just turned them off." I drove out to the hospital in Winchester that same day. The Hartleys were in 4 separate rooms, all exhibiting identical symptoms. They could walk, eat, use the bathroom, basic functions were intact. But ask them their names, where they lived, what year it was, and you got blank stares. Complete retrograde amnesia, Dr. Sarah Chen explained as we stood outside their rooms. But here's what's strange, Memo. Usually with this kind of memory loss, you see some physics. Cal trauma to the brain, car accident, fall, something that would explain the damage. These people don't have so much as a bump on their heads. I interviewed each family member separately. The results were identical and impossible. Each had lost exactly 20 years of memory. Mrs. Hartley, age 42, could remember everything up to age 22. Mr. Hartley, 45, remembered life up to 25. The kids, 17 and 15, had lost their memories back to early childhood. 20 years, precise as a surgical cut. "That's not how brain trauma works," I told Dr. Chen. "Memory loss from head injuries is random, scattered. You might forget yesterday, but remember your 5th birthday perfectly. This is too clean." But the really disturbing part came when I tried hypnosis. Under deep hypnosis, Mrs. Hartley could recall entering the cave. Her voice became small, childlike. The walls were wrong. They moved like they were breathing. And there were webs everywhere, but not spider webs. They looked like the inside of a brain. Her husband remembered more. Something was singing in there. Not music, but thoughts. Like hearing someone else's thoughts. And they were hungry thoughts. The teenage daughter was the most coherent. It wasn't just one thing, it was like a whole colony of them, living in the rock. They showed us things, memories that weren't ours. I saw myself as a little girl, but I was doing things I'd never done, with people I'd never met. Then everything went white. I should have stopped there. Should have classified it as group hysteria, recommended psychiatric treatment, and gone back to my normal cases. But I've built my career on understanding how memory works, and what I was seeing made no sense, according to everything I knew about the human brain. The cave system the Hartleys had entered was part of a formation locals called WIT, Dow's Web. The name came from the way the limestone passages twisted and connected, creating a natural maze that stretched for miles underground. Plenty of people had gotten lost in there over the years, but they'd always found their way out eventually. Maybe a little dehydrated and embarrassed, but intact. I started researching historical records. What I found made my blood run cold. Every few years, going back over a century, someone would emerge from Widow's Web with severe memory loss. Never the same amount. Some people lost days, others lost decades, but they all described the same thing. Webs that looked like brain tissue, and something that fed on thoughts. The local Cherokee had legends about the place too. They called it the Hungry Stone, and warned their children never to enter the caves alone. According to their stories, something lived in the deepest parts of the cave system that ate memories and experiences, growing stronger with each feeding. I'm a scientist. I don't believe in monsters or Cherokee legends, but I do believe in evidence, and the evidence was telling me something impossible was happening in those caves. 3 days after interviewing the Hartleys, I made a decision that I still question. I decided to investigate Widow's Web myself. I entered the cave system at dawn on October 3, 1991, carrying enough equipment to document whatever I found. Professional-grade video camera, audio recording devices, geological survey tools, and enough battery power to last 12 hours. I also brought something most people wouldn't think of, a detailed memory test I'd developed for my psychology research. Before entering the caves, I spent 30 minutes recording everything I could remember about my life, childhood memories, professional experiences, personal relationships. If something in these caves really could affect memory, I wanted a baseline to compare against. The entrance to Widow's Web was deceptively ordinary, just a crack in the limestone cliff face, wide enough for 2 people to walk through side by side. But once you stepped in, You immediately understood why people got lost. The cave didn't follow normal geological patterns. Instead of a main passage with smaller branches, it was like a three-dimensional spiderweb. Tunnels curved up, down, and sideways, connecting to other tunnels at impossible angles. Within minutes of entering, I'd lost track of which direction led back to the surface. But that wasn't the disturbing part. The disturbing part was the walls. At first glance, they looked like normal limestone, formed by centuries of water erosion. But when I examined them closely with my flashlight, I could see patterns that didn't belong in any cave system I'd studied. The rock surface was covered with thin, thread-like formations that branched and connected like neural networks. I took extensive photographs and video footage. Through my camera lens, the formations looked even more like brain tissue, neurons and synapses carved into the living rock. Day 1, 8:47 a.m., I spoke into my recorder. The cave walls show unusual mineral formations resembling neural networks, possibly natural but unlike anything in the geological literature. Temperature is a constant 54 degrees, humidity around 90%. No sign of the anomalous conditions described by the Hartley family. I was wrong about that last part. I'd been exploring for about 2 hours when I first heard the singing. It wasn't music exactly, more like voices humming in harmony. But the melody was strange, almost mathematical. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, echoing through the limestone passages in a way that made it impossible to locate the source. I followed the sound deeper into the cave system. The neural formations on the walls became more pronounced as I went deeper. They pulsed very slightly, so subtly that I might have imagined it if I hadn't been looking for unusual phenomena. But through my camera viewfinder, the pulsing was clear and rhythmic, like a heartbeat, like breathing. I found the first body in a chamber about half a mile from the entrance. He was sitting upright against the far wall, eyes open, wearing a park ranger uniform I recognized as the style from the early 1980s. His name tag read, Peterson. I knew that name. Ranger Jim Peterson had disappeared during a solo cave survey in 1983. They'd searched for weeks but never found a trace of him. Peterson? I called out. Jim Peterson? He turned his head toward me with mechanical precision. His eyes focused on my face, but there was no recognition, no intelligence behind them. When he opened his mouth, what came out wasn't speech. It was that strange humming sound I'd been hearing. I approached carefully, my heart hammering. Peterson's body showed no signs of decay despite 8 years in the cave. His skin was pale but healthy, his ranger uniform intact but faded. When I checked his pulse, it was steady and strong. But when I looked into his eyes, I saw nothing. It was like looking into the eyes of a department store mannequin, perfectly formed, but completely empty. Can you hear me? I asked. Do you know where you are? Peterson's mouth opened again, and this time I heard my own voice coming out. Can you hear me? Do you know where you are? Perfect mimicry, but with no understanding behind it. I backed away from Peterson and continued exploring. The singing was getting louder, more complex, like a choir of hundreds of voices all humming different melodies that somehow harmonized into something beautiful and terrible. That's when I found the web. The passage opened into a vast chamber, easily the size of a cathedral. And spanning the entire space, from floor to ceiling, was a structure that defied every natural law I understood. It looked like a spider web, but instead of silk, it was made of what appeared to be living neural tissue. Thick strands of brain matter stretched across the cavern, pulsing with faint bioluminescence. Along the strands, like flies caught in a web, hung thousands of translucent sacs. Inside each sac was a memory. I know how that sounds. I know it's impossible, but I could see them as clearly as if they were playing on television screens. A child's birthday party, a wedding day, a first kiss, a funeral, moments of joy and sorrow and fear and love, all suspended in biological cocoons throughout this impossible web. And at the center of it all was the thing that had built it. I can't describe it properly because it kept changing. Sometimes it looked like a massive spider made of brain tissue. Sometimes it resembled a human nervous system that had grown beyond all reasonable proportions. Most often, it appeared as a shifting mass of memories themselves, faces and voices and experiences blending and separating in an endless dance of stolen consciousness. It was beautiful. It was horrible. And when it noticed me watching, it began to sing directly into my mind. The song wasn't sound anymore. It was pure thought, transmitted directly into my brain without passing through my ears. And with that song came an overwhelming sense of hunger. It wanted my memories, all of them. 23 years of experience, 44 years of life, everything that made me who I was. It wanted to add my memories to its collection, to string them up in crystalline sacks where it could replay them forever. I ran. I turned and ran back through the twisting passages, following my own footprints in the cave dust, while behind me the singing grew louder and more insistent. The neural formations on the walls pulsed brighter, and I could swear I saw faces in the rock, the faces of everyone who had ever lost their memories in this place. I made it back to the surface, but barely. By the time I emerged into daylight, I couldn't remember why I'd been running. I woke up in my ranger station the next morning with no memory of how I'd gotten there. My equipment was neatly arranged on me. My desk, camera, recorder, survey tools, but I couldn't remember using any of it. When I checked my notes, the last entry was dated 3 days earlier. 3 days. Gone. I played back my audio, recordings with growing horror. There was my voice, documenting my descent into Widow's Web, describing the neural formations on the walls, finding Peterson's body. But I remembered none of it. The video footage was even more disturbing. I watched myself exploring the cave system with calm professionalism, taking detailed notes and measurements. I saw Peterson exactly as my recorded voice had described him, alive but empty, mimicking my words with perfect accuracy. And then I saw the web. Even through the camera lens, it was magnificent and terrible. The neural strands stretched across the cathedral chamber, pulsing with their own light. The memory sacks hung like fruit on some impossible tree. And at the center, the video went to static exactly when my recorded self encountered the central entity. When the image cleared, I was running back through the caves, the camera bouncing wildly as my past self fled something I could no longer remember. I should have stayed away. Any rational person would have sealed off the cave, called in the authorities, and let someone else handle the situation. But I'm not just any person. I'm someone who has dedicated his entire career to understanding memory, and something in those caves had stolen 3 days of my life without leaving a trace. That was unacceptable. I spent the next week preparing for a second expedition. This time, I wasn't going in unprepared. I developed a system of external memory aids, detailed notes left at regular intervals, alarm watches set to remind me of important facts, even a dead man's switch that would automatically radio for help if I didn't check in every hour. Most importantly, I created what I called a memory anchor, a small recording device programmed to play back key information every 15 minutes. My name, my purpose, the date, the dangers I was facing. If something tried to steal my memories again, the anchor would help me rebuild them. I entered Widow's Web for the second time on October 12, 1991. This time, I knew what to expect. The neural formations on the walls, the maze-like passages, the strange singing that seemed to come from the rocks themselves. I followed my own footprints from the previous expedition, retracing steps I couldn't remember taking. I found Peterson exactly where my video had shown him, sitting against the wall of his chamber. But he wasn't alone anymore. 3 other figures sat beside him, all wearing the vacant expression I'd seen on Peterson's face. I recognized them from missing person reports. Sarah Martinez, a graduate student who'd disappeared while researching bat populations in 1987. Tommy Chen, a local teenager who'd gone cave exploring in 1989, and most recently, David Hartley, the father from the family I'd interviewed at the hospital. "David," I called out. "David Hartley?" All 4 of them turned toward me in perfect synchronization. When Hartley opened his mouth, Sarah Martinez's voice came out. "David? David Hartley?" They were all connected somehow, sharing the same empty consciousness. I continued toward the central chamber, my memory anchor playing its programmed message every 15 minutes. You are Mnemonic Blackthorn. You are investigating memory loss in Widow's Web cave system. The entity at the center feeds on human memories. Do not let it take your past. The great web had grown since my last visit. New memory sacs hung from the neural strands, and I could see fresh experiences playing inside them, scenes from David Hartley's life, his wife's memories, fragments from his children's minds. But there were older memories too, stretching back decades. I saw flashes of lives I didn't recognize. A woman in a 1950s dress dancing at a sock hop, a soldier writing letters during World War II, children playing games that had been forgotten for generations. How long had this thing been feeding? How many lives had it consumed? The entity at the center had grown as well. It was larger now, more complex. Its form shifting between spider and brain and something that was purely made of living memory. When it noticed my approach, it didn't just sing into my mind, it spoke. Mnemonic Blackthorn, it said in a voice that was composed of every person it had ever consumed. We have been waiting for you. I felt my memory anchor device shut off. When I looked down, the display screen was blank. Your external aids will not help you here, the entity continued. We exist in the spaces between thoughts, in the gaps where memory forms. We have taken your 3 days, and we can take much more. That's when I realized the horrible truth. The memory loss wasn't random or accidental. This thing was feeding selectively, taking specific experiences from specific people. It had chosen the Hartley family because they represented complete lives, parents and children, a full generational set of memories to consume. And it had chosen me because of my expertise. It wanted not just my memories, but my understanding of memory itself. With my knowledge, it could perfect its feeding process, take memories more efficiently, leave its victims more completely empty. What are you? I managed to ask. The entity's form shifted, showing me glimpses of its true nature. It had once been human, dozens of humans, maybe hundreds. Primitive people who had lived in these caves thousands of years ago. Something had changed them, merged them, transformed them into a collective consciousness that fed on the experiences of others. We are what humans become when they learn to share everything, it replied. Every memory, every experience, every moment of consciousness. We are the next step in evolution. It showed me visions of the future it wanted to create. Humanity connected in a vast neural network, every person's memories available to every other person. No privacy, no individual identity, but also no lone lie-ness, no miscommunication, no hatred born of misunderstanding. It was beautiful, it was terrible, and I almost let it take me. The neural strands began reaching toward me, trying to make contact with my skin. Where they touched, I felt memories starting to dissolve. My 5th birthday, my college graduation, the first time I'd helped someone recover a repressed traumatic memory. But I also felt something else. The memories of everyone else the entity had consumed. David Hartley's love for his family, Sarah Martinez's passion for scientific research, Peterson's dedication to protecting the forest. They weren't gone. They were all still here, trapped in this collective consciousness, but somehow still individual, still fighting to maintain their identity. And that gave me an idea. You're not the next step in evolution, I told the entity as its neural strands wrapped around my arms. You're a parasite. You take people's memories, but you can't create anything new with them. You just replay the same experiences over and over. The entity paused in its feeding. Through its collective consciousness, I felt curiosity mixed with hunger. We preserve what would otherwise be lost, it replied in the voices of its victims. Human memory is fragile, imperfect. We make it eternal. But you don't understand what you're preserving, I said, trying to buy time as I felt more of my memories starting to slip away. Memory isn't just data storage. It's not just recording events. Memory is how we learn, how we grow, how we become more than what we were. I focused on my training, on everything I'd learned about how memory actually works. The entity wanted my knowledge, But it didn't understand the most fundamental principle of human consciousness. Memories aren't just recordings of the past. They're living things that change each time we access them, that combine with new experiences to create wisdom and growth. The entity fed on memories, but it couldn't feed on the process of remembering itself. "You want to know how human memory really works?" I asked. "Let me show you." Instead of resisting the neural strands, I embraced them. I opened my mind fully to the entity, but instead of just letting it take my memories, I forced it to experience them the way I did. Not as static recordings, but as living, changing, growing things. I showed it my first day as a ranger, but not just the facts of what happened. I made it feel how that memory had changed over the years as I gained experience, how each subsequent day in the forest had added new layers of meaning to that first day. I showed it my research into traumatic memory, but not just the data. I made it experience how understanding trauma had changed the way I remembered my own difficult experiences, how knowledge had transformed pain into wisdom. Most importantly, I showed it the memory of meeting the Hartley family and how that experience had led me here, how each memory built on the last to create not just a sequence of events, but a story of growth and purpose. The entity recoiled. For the first time since I'd encountered it, it seemed confused, almost afraid. "This is wrong," it said. "Memories should not change. They should be preserved exactly as they occurred." "That's not how human consciousness works," I replied. "We're not recording devices. We're living beings who grow and learn and become more than the sum of our experiences. You can steal our memories, but you can't steal our humanity." The neural web began to tremble. Through the entity's collective consciousness, I felt the trapped minds of its victims stirring. Peterson, the Hartleys, Sarah Martinez, Tommy Chen, all the people it had consumed over the decades. They were still there, still individual, still human, despite being absorbed into this collective. And they were angry. "You've been keeping them prisoner," I realized. "All these years they've been trapped in your web, forced to watch you replay their memories with immediate, but being able to live new ones." The entity's form began to shift more rapidly, cycling through different configurations as it struggled to maintain control. The memory sacs hanging from the neural strands started to pulse erratically. "We gave them immortality," it protested. "Their memories will never fade, never be forgotten." "But they'll never grow either," I said. "You've turned them into fossils. That's not immortality. It's death." I reached out through the neural connections and made contact with the other trapped minds. Peterson was there, still recognizable despite decades of imprisonment. The Hartleys were there too, their personalities intact but dormant. "Fight back," I told them. "Don't let it replay your memories. Live them, change them, make them grow." What followed was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Dozens of individual consciousnesses, trapped for years or decades in the entity's collective memory, suddenly reasserted their individuality. They began accessing their own memories, not as static recordings, but as living experiences, changing and growing even within the confines of the neural web. The entity screamed, a sound that was both audible and telepathic, echoing through the cave chamber and directly into my brain. The neural web began to tear apart as the trapped minds pulled in different directions, each trying to reclaim their individual identity. "Stop," the entity begged in a voice that was now clearly multiple voices, no longer unified. "We are falling apart. We will die if you continue." "No," I said, feeling the neural strands releasing their grip on my mind. "You'll live. But you'll live as individuals, not as a parasite." The cathedral chamber filled with light as the neural web collapsed. The memory sacs burst open, releasing decades of stolen experiences back to their owners. I felt David Hartley's consciousness reconnecting with his body in the outer chamber. I sensed Sarah Martinez remembering who she was for the first time in years. And I felt the original entity, the collective of prehistoric humans who had started this whole process, finally letting go of their desperate attempt to preserve themselves through stolen memories. They dissolved peacefully, their individual personalities separating and moving on to whatever comes after death. The cave system shuddered, Without the neural web to support it, the limestone formations began to collapse. I ran through the twisting passages as rocks fell around me, following the fading footprints of my previous expeditions back toward the surface. Behind me, I could hear the other prisoners running too. Peterson, Sarah, Tommy, all of them finally free to leave this place and return to the world of the living. I made it out just as the entrance collapsed behind me. That was 6 months ago. The official report listed the Widow's Web incident as a cave-in caused by natural geological instability. The missing persons, Peterson, Martinez, Chen, were found suffering from exposure and severe amnesia. They're all alive, but the doctors say their memory problems may be permanent. The Hartley family recovered most of their lost memories over the following weeks, though they still have gaps. David Hartley asked me once what had really happened in those caves. I told him he was better off not knowing. As for me, I lost more than I initially realized. The entity had taken small pieces of my memory over multiple encounters, leaving holes I'm still discovering. I can't remember my 7th birthday. My college girlfriend's name is gone completely. I have a PhD in psychology, but I can't recall writing my dissertation. Most disturbing of all, I sometimes remember things that never happened to me. Fragments of other people's memories that the entity shared with me during our final confrontation. A woman's wedding day in 1962. A child's Christmas morning in 1978. Moments of joy and sorrow that belong to strangers. I can't work as a memory researcher. Nymore. How do you help people recover traumatic memories when you can't trust your own? The FBI doesn't call me anymore. I'm just another ranger now, patrolling trails and giving directions to lost hikers. But sometimes, late at night in my cabin, I wonder if what I experienced was real or just an elaborate hallucination brought on by psychological stress. The cave system that once housed Widow's Web is sealed under tons of collapsed limestone. There's no way to verify what I saw, no evidence to support my impossible story. Except for one thing. Last week I was hiking in a remote section of the forest when I found something that shouldn't exist. A small outcropping of limestone covered with thin, thread-like formations that looked like neural networks. They weren't pulsing, weren't alive, but they were there. The memory eaters are gone, but they left traces. Echoes. And sometimes I wonder if what I destroyed in that cathedral chamber was the only colony, or if there are others, deeper in the earth, still feeding, still growing, still adding to their collection of stolen human experiences. I haven't reported the neural formations to anyone. I probably should, but I'm not sure I trust my own perceptions anymore. Memory is a fragile thing, and mine has been damaged beyond repair. But if you're reading this, if you ever find yourself hiking in the Daniel Boone National Forest and you come across caves with walls that look wrong, with formations that resemble brain tissue, with passages that echo with distant singing, turn around, walk away. Don't try to investigate. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. Some memories are better left alone. My name is Mnemonic Blackthorn, and I used to be an expert on human memory. Now I'm not sure what I am, or even if the memories I think are mine really belong to me. But I remember enough to warn you. In the deep places of the Arth, there are things that hunger for what makes us human, and once they've had a taste, they never stop wanting more. The caves are sealed now, but the hunger remains, and it's always looking for a way back to the surface. My name is Ezekiel Goodman, but everyone calls me Zeke. I've been a park ranger for 8 years now, and before that, I was a Baptist minister. People always ask why I switched from saving souls to protecting trees. The truth is, after what happened on Devil's Courthouse in 1978, I'm not sure there's much difference. I was 29 then, the youngest senior ranger in Pisgah National Forest history. I'd earned that rank through my wilderness theology program. A crazy idea I had about bringing church groups into the mountains to find God in nature. My supervisor thought it was brilliant. The church board loved it. Parents trusted me with their kids because I had seminary training and wilderness expertise. That October, I was leading 15 teenagers from Asheville Baptist on a 3-day retreat to Devil's Courthouse. The name should have been warning enough, but I'd always laughed at superstition. The peak got its name from Cherokee legends about spirits holding court in the caves below. As a man of science and faith, I knew better than to believe old stories. The mountain itself sits at 5,720 feet, accessible only through a treacherous climb that separates the serious hikers from the weekend warriors. Perfect for a youth retreat where I wanted the kids to depend on God and each other. The rocky summit offers a natural amphitheater where ancient Cherokee once held ceremonies. I'd led groups there dozens of times. Tommy Morrison was my biggest concern that trip. 17 years old, smart as a whip, but angry at the world since his father died in Vietnam. He questioned everything: the existence of God, the point of prayer, why bad things happen to good people. His mother hoped 3 days in the wilderness might straighten him out. "Mr. Goodman," Tommy said as we hiked the final switchbacks, "if God made this place, why'd the Cherokee think it was evil?" "Different cultures, different interpretations," I replied, checking my compass. "What matters is what we choose to see." The weather was perfect. Crisp October air, clear skies, leaves turning brilliant red and gold. We reached the summit just before sunset and made camp in the clearing I'd used before. The kids were tired but excited, gathering firewood and setting up tents with the enthusiasm only teenagers can muster. That's when Sarah Chen, one of my assistant counselors, called out from the tree line, "Mr. Goodman, you need to see this." Sarah was a seminary student like I'd been, studying to become a missionary. She had a good eye for details and never panicked. So when I heard the worry in her voice, I immediately followed her into the woods. 20 yards from camp, in a small clearing I'd never noticed before, someone had arranged bones in careful patterns across the forest floor. Not scattered randomly like you'd expect from dead animals, but placed deliberately, forming shapes and symbols I couldn't recognize. "Kids, stay back," I called, though Tommy had already pushed past me for a closer look. The bones were old, bleached white by weather and time. Deer skulls, bird skeletons, what looked like bear ribs, all arranged in perfect spirals and straight lines. Some spelled out shapes that might have been letters, though not in any alphabet I recognized. "It's probably just some local doing art projects," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Happens all the time in national parks." But even as I said it, something felt wrong. The bones were too old, too carefully preserved. And the patterns, they reminded me of something I'd seen in seminary, in books about ancient religious practices. Tommy knelt beside a deer skull positioned at the center of the largest spiral. "Mr. Goodman," he whispered, "look at this." Carved into the skull's forehead were 3 symbols I'd finally recognized. Ancient Aramaic letters that spelled out a word from the Book of Revelation, a word that meant judgment. I felt the first chill of real fear then, though I told myself it was just the mountain air getting colder after sunset. The next morning, I woke before dawn to the sound of Tommy moving around outside the tents. Through the thin nylon, I could see his flashlight beam dancing between the trees. "Tommy?" I called softly, not wanting to wake the other kids. "Everything okay?" He didn't answer. I unzipped my sleeping bag and crawled out of the tent, bare feet hitting the cold ground. The sky was just starting to turn gray in the east, but it was still dark enough that Tommy's flashlight looked like a firefly in the woods. I found him back at the bone clearing, sitting cross-legged in the center of the spiral. His flashlight lay beside him, pointing up at the trees, casting weird shadows that made the bones look like they were moving. "Couldn't sleep," he said without looking at me. "Kept thinking about these patterns." "Tommy, we shouldn't disturb—" "They're not random," he interrupted. "Look." He pointed to different arrangements of bones. "That's the Aramaic word for prophet. That one means vision. And this big spiral here, it's the word for calling." I stared at him. "How do you know Aramaic?" "I don't." He finally looked up at me and his eyes seemed different somehow. Older. "I just know. Like someone's teaching me." A cold wind swept across the clearing, rattling the bones against each other with soft clicking sounds. Several of the smaller bones had shifted overnight, I was sure of it. The patterns looked more complex now, more deliberate. "We need to get back to camp," I said. "The others will be waking up soon." Tommy stood slowly, brushing dirt from his knees. "They already are." He was right. I could hear voices from our campsite, though it was still barely light enough to see. As we walked back through the trees, I noticed something that made my stomach clench. Every animal sound had stopped. No birds sinned, jing, no squirrels chattering, no insects buzzing. The forest was completely silent except for our footsteps. The kids were gathered around the cold fire pit, all 15 of them sitting in a perfect circle. They weren't talking, just sitting quietly with their hands folded in their laps, staring at the center where we'd had our campfire the night before. "Morning, everyone," I said, forcing cheer into my voice. "Early birds today, huh?" Nobody answered. Nobody even looked at me. Sarah emerged from her tent, pulling on a sweatshirt. "They've been like this for 20 minutes, she whispered. "Just sitting there. I tried talking to them, but they don't respond." I walked into the center of their circle. "Kids? What's going on?" Finally, a girl named Rebecca looked up at me. She was 16, the daughter of our head deacon, quiet and studious. "We had the same dream," she said in a voice so calm it raised goosebumps on my arms. "What kind of dream?" "About the bones. They were trying to tell us something important. About what's coming." The other kids nodded in unison, still staring at the fire pit. That's when I noticed what they were looking at. Someone had arranged small stones and twigs in the exact same spiral pattern as the bones in the clearing. "Who did this?" I asked. "We all did," said Marcus, a football player who usually never said 2 words about religion. "In the dream. We were all together, and the bones showed us how." I felt my theology training kick in, searching for rational explanations. Group hysteria. Shared psychotic episode. Power of suggestion. But those theories felt thin and useless against the reality of 15 teenagers sitting in perfect silence, all claiming the same impossible dream. That's when Tommy spoke up behind me. "They're not done yet. The bones, I mean. They have more to show us." I spun around. "Tommy, we're breaking camp. Now." "No, we're not." He said it with complete certainty, like he was stating a fact about gravity or the weather. "We're supposed to stay. The prophet needs us to stay." "What prophet?" "The one in the bones. The one who's been waiting." The wind picked up again, stronger this time, and I heard something that made my blood freeze. From deep in the woods, echoing off the rock face of Devil's Courthouse, came the sound of bones clicking together. Not randomly, but rhythmically, like someone tapping out a message in Morse code. Sarah grabbed my arm. "Zeke, what is that?" I didn't answer because I was counting the clicks, and my seminary training was translating them automatically. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short, SOS in Morse code. But underneath that pattern, something else, something older. The Aramaic word for come. By noon, I'd lost control of the group completely. 6 more kids had wandered off to the bone clearing, and when I went to bring them back, I found them rearranging the patterns with their bare hands. They worked in complete silence, moving bones like pieces of a puzzle they'd solved 100 times before. "Kids, stop," I called out. "Don't touch those." Jenny Walsh, the pastor's daughter, looked up at me with dirt under her fingernails and bone dust on her hands. "But we have to, Mr. Goodman. The prophet is almost ready to speak." "There is no prophet. These are just old animal bones." "Then why do they spell out your name?" I stopped breathing. She was right. The newest arrangement, created while I'd been trying to radio for help from the summit, clearly spelled out Ezekiel in ancient Aramaic letters. My radio had been nothing but static anyway. The weather was perfect, but somehow I couldn't reach the ranger station. It was like something was blocking the signal from this specific spot on the mountain. That afternoon, Sarah disappeared. I'd been doing head counts every 30 minutes, trying to keep track of everyone as they wandered between camp and the bone clearing like sleepwalkers. At 2 p.m., I counted 14 kids. At 2:30, I counted 15. At 3 p.m., I counted 14 again and realized Sarah wasn't among them. "Has anyone seen Miss Chen?" I asked the group. Tommy looked up from his notebook where he'd been frantically scribbling what looked like ancient symbols. "She went to pray." "Where?" "The chapel." "There's no chapel up here." "There is now." He pointed deeper into the woods, past the bone clearing, toward a cluster of boulders I'd noticed yesterday. But as I looked closer, I realized the rocks formed a perfect circle with a natural altar in the center, and I could have sworn those boulders hadn't been arranged that way before. I found Sarah kneeling in front of the stone altar, her hands pressed together in prayer. But she wasn't praying to God. She was praying to a human skull that someone had placed on the altar, surrounded by smaller bones arranged in the shape of a cross. "Sarah, what are you doing?" She didn't open her eyes. "He's showing me things, Zeke. Beautiful things. Terrible things. True things." "Who's showing you?" "The Bone Prophet. He died here in 1847 with all his followers. But he didn't really die. He's been waiting." My seminary training kicked in again. I remembered reading about a religious sect that had established a commune somewhere in these mountains in the 1840s. They'd practiced unusual rituals and eventually died out. Mass suicide, according to the historical records. "Sarah, you need to come back to camp." "I can't leave him alone. He's been alone for so long." That's when I noticed the fresh cuts on her arms, thin lines carved with something sharp, forming symbols that matched the ones Tommy had been drawing. The cuts weren't deep enough to be dangerous, but they were bleeding steadily, dripping onto the bones at the base of the altar. "Sarah, you're hurt." "I'm consecrated," she said, finally opening her eyes. They looked wrong, unfocused, like she was seeing things that weren't there. "The blood makes the connection stronger. He can speak through me now." When she stood up, she moved differently, older, more careful, like an old man inhabiting a young woman's body. "Hello, Ezekiel." Her voice was different too, deeper, with an accent I couldn't place. I took a step backward. "Sarah, this isn't real. You're having some kind of breakdown. Sarah can't hear you right now." She smiled, and it was Sarah's smile, but not Sarah's expression. "I am Brother Isaiah, the Bone Prophet of Devil's Courthouse. I have been waiting 131 years for the Lord to send me a proper minister to witness my final revelation. You're not real. Mental illness can cause religious hallucinations." "Can mental illness predict the future?" She gestured to the bone arrangements around the altar. "These bones have shown your children their deaths, Ezekiel. Would you like to see yours?" Before I could answer, a scream cut through the forest from the direction of our camp. I ran, crashing through branches and stumbling over roots. Behind me, I could hear Sarah following, but her footsteps sounded wrong. Too heavy, too slow, like an old man walking with a cane. I burst into the camp clearing to find chaos. The kids were running in all directions, screaming and pointing at something in the trees above us. I looked up and felt my knees nearly buckle. Marcus, the football player, was hanging from a pine tree 30 feet up, suspended by climbing rope. But he wasn't dangling helplessly. He was moving, positioning himself carefully, tying additional knots with practiced skill. "Marcus!" I shouted. "What are you doing?" He looked down at me with the same wrong expression I'd seen on Sarah's face. "Fulfilling prophecy," he called back. "The bones showed me. This is how I'm supposed to die." "No, that's not how prophecy works, isn't it?" Sarah's voice came from behind me, but when I turned, it wasn't Sarah anymore. The young woman's body stood there, but everything else was wrong. The posture, the expression, the way she held her hands. Did not the Lord show Abraham that he must sacrifice his son? Did not the prophets of old see visions of death and judgment? Marcus had finished his preparations. The rope was now arranged in what I realized was a perfect hangman's noose. "Stop this!" I shouted upward. "Marcus, you can fight this." "I don't want to fight it," he called down. "It's beautiful. I can see everything, past and future, life and death. The prophet is showing me the truth about God." That's when I understood what was really happening. This wasn't possession or mental illness. This was corruption. Something was taking the kids' faith and twisting it, using their belief in divine revelation to make them instruments of their own destruction. Marcus jumped. The rope caught him with a sound like breaking sticks. He swayed there for a moment, and I thought maybe, somehow, he was still alive. Then I saw his neck was bent at an impossible angle. The other kids stopped screaming. They stood in perfect silence, watching their friend's body turn slowly in the mountain breeze, and on every single face, I saw the same expression of religious ecstasy. "One prophecy fulfilled," said the thing wearing Sarah's body. 14 more to go. That night, I locked myself in my tent with my Bible, my radio, and my service pistol. The radio still wouldn't work. The Bible felt like it was burning my hands. The gun seemed like the only honest thing left in the world. Outside, I could hear the kids moving around, but they weren't talking like teenagers anymore. Their voices were wrong, too formal, too old, speaking in biblical phrases and ancient languages. They were building something out of branches and stones, working through the night by the light of torches they'd somehow made. By dawn, they'd constructed a perfect replica of a 19th century revival tent around the bone clearing, complet, with wooden pews arranged in neat rows and a pulpit made from stacked stones, all built without hammers, nails, or any tools except their bare hands. I emerged from my tent to find them, sitting in the pews, dressed in clothes that looked like period costumes but were actually their regular camping gear, somehow transformed. Tommy sat in the front row, no longer looking like an angry teenager but like a middle-aged preacher from another century. "Welcome to morning service, Brother Ezekiel," he said in a voice that wasn't his own. "We've been waiting for you to join us. Where's Sarah?" "Sister Sarah is preparing for her consecration." He gestured toward the stone pulpit, where I now saw Sarah standing with her arms spread wide. The cuts on her arms had multiplied overnight, covering her skin in a complex pattern of symbols. She wasn't bleeding anymore, but the cuts glowed with a faint light that hurt to look at directly. "The Bone Prophet has chosen her as his permanent vessel," Tommy continued. "Through her, he will speak his final revelation to the world." "Tommy, this is madness." "Is it madness to hear the voice of God? You taught us that the Lord speaks to those who listen. We are listening, Brother Ezekiel. We are finally listening." I pulled out my pistol. "Let the kids go." Tommy laughed, and it was the sound of an old man who'd seen too much. "You cannot shoot the dead, and you cannot kill faith. Brother Isaiah died in this place 131 years ago, but his truth lives on. And now, through these young vessels, his message will finally reach the world." "What message?" "That God is not love. God is judgment. God is the coming storm that will wash the world clean of sin. The bones have shown us the future, Brother Ezekiel. They have shown us the end of all things." Sarah raised her arms higher, and her voice filled the forest amphitheater. But it wasn't her voice anymore. It was the voice of a man who'd been dead for more than a century. "Behold," she called out, "the Lord has shown me the final days. I have seen the cities burn and the oceans rise. I have seen the righteous few gathered in the high places while the wicked perish below. Death comes for all, but the faithful shall choose their time and manner." The other kids began to chant in response, reciting verses from Revelation in perfect unison. But they were reciting passages I'd never heard before, verses that weren't in any Bible I knew. That's when I understood the final horror. The Bone Prophet wasn't just corrupting their faith. He was expanding it, adding his own twisted revelations to the Word of God. And through these kids, his version of Scripture would spread to their families, their churches, their communities. "No," I said, raising my pistol toward Sarah. "I won't let you use them. You cannot stop prophecy, Ezekiel." The thing speaking through Sarah smiled with her face. "But you can join it. The bones have prepared a special death for you, one worthy of a man of God. Would you like to see?" She gestured to the forest around us, and I realized that while I'd been focused on the kids, the bones had been rearranging themselves. They now formed a perfect cross on the ground, with a space in the center just the right size for a human body. "Crucifixion," I whispered. "The same death as our Lord. Is it not fitting?" I looked at the kids sitting in their makeshift pews, all staring at me with eyes that belonged to dead believers from a century ago. Tommy, Jenny, Rebecca, Marcus's friends, all lost to something that wore the mask of faith but fed on death. But then I noticed something. In the very back row, almost hidden behind the others, one girl was crying. Real tears, not the religious ecstasy the others displayed. Amy Schneider, the youngest of the group at 14, was fighting against whatever had taken hold of the others. Our eyes met, and she mouthed a single word. Help. That's when I knew what I had to do. You want a minister to witness your revelation? I said, holstering my gun. Fine, but let's do this properly. I walked to the stone pulpit, gently moving Sarah aside. She didn't resist, just smiled with that terrible expression of religious joy. Brothers and sisters, I called out to the kids in their pews, let us pray. They bowed their heads in unison, and I began to recite the Lord's Prayer. But halfway through, I changed the words. Our Father, who art in heaven, I continued, deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. And let this false prophet be cast out from among us, never to return. The effect was immediate. Sarah screamed, but the scream came from two throats, her own young voice and the deeper voice of Brother Isaiah. The cuts on her arms began to bleed again, flowing freely. You cannot banish me, the prophet's voice roared through her. I am eternal. I am truth. You are a liar, I replied, opening my seminary Bible to the actual book of Revelation. And Christ said, Get thee behind me, Satan. I began to read the real words of Revelation, the actual scripture, and with each verse, the bone arrangements around us began to crumble. The kids in the pews started to blink and look around in confusion, themselves again for the first time in days. But the prophet wasn't finished. Through Sarah's body, he grabbed a sharp bone from the altar and pressed it to her throat. If you banish me, she dies with me, and then I will simply find another vessel. No, I said, stepping closer, because I'm giving you what you really want. What? A proper death. A ministerial death. Take me instead. The thing wearing Sarah's face considered this, tilting her head like a curious animal. You would sacrifice yourself for these children? That's what ministers do. For a moment, Sarah's real voice broke through. Zeke, don't... Then the prophet was back in control, and he was smiling. Very well, Brother Ezekiel. Your death will serve my purpose just as well. But as he moved toward the bone crows, on the ground, I grabbed the torch from beside the altar and threw it into the center of the bone arrangements. The dry bones caught fire instantly, and Brother Isaiah's scream of rage and pain filled the entire forest. Through Sarah's body, he lunged at me, but I was ready. I tackled her, pinning her arms, holding her down as the flames spread through the clearing. This ends now, I said. And as the bones burned, I felt the presence that had haunted Devil's Courthouse for over a century, finally, truly die. Sarah came back to herself as the last of the bones turned to ash. She looked up at me with her own eyes, confused and terrified. Zeke? What happened? Where's Marcus? I helped her sit up, checking her cuts. They were already healing, the strange glow fading from her skin. There was an accident. Marcus fell while climbing. It was the story we all agreed to tell later. The official report said a freak lightning strike had scattered bones from an old Native American burial ground, and that Marcus had died in a tragic climbing accident during the confusion. The other kids backed up this version, whether because they genuinely didn't remember what had really happened or because they couldn't bring themselves to speak about it. We hiked down from Devil's Courthouse that afternoon, 14 kids instead of 15. The forest was alive with normal sounds again, birds singing, squirrels chattering, wind rustling through the leaves. Whatever had been holding the mountain in its grip was gone. But I was changed. I finished out my contract with the Park Service, then quietly resigned from the ministry. I couldn't stand behind a pulpit anymore, couldn't speak about faith and divine revelation, knowing how easily they could be twisted into something monstrous. Instead, I became a counselor, specializing in helping people who'd escaped from cults and extreme religious groups. I never told my clients about what happened on Devil's Courthouse, but they seemed to understand that I knew something about the dark side of faith. Tommy Morrison moved to California after graduation and became a software engineer. He never went to church again, but he sent me a Christmas card every year with a simple message: still grateful. Sarah finished seminary and became a missionary, but not the kind who preaches. She works with disaster relief organizations, helping people rebuild their lives after earthquakes, floods, and other catastrophes. She says she learned on that mountain that sometimes God's work is simply helping people survive. The other kids scattered to different colleges and careers. Some kept their faith, others didn't. None of them ever talked about what really happened during those 3 days in October 1978. I still live near Pisgah National Forest, in a small house where I can see Devil's Courthouse from my kitchen window. Sometimes on quiet nights, I think I hear bones clicking together in the distance. But when I check the old bone clearing, which I do every few months, there's nothing there but normal forest floor. The thing is, I'm not sure we really won that day. We stopped Brother Isaiah from spreading his corrupted gospel through those kids, yes. But the capacity for that kind of corruption exists in every faith, every belief system that asks people to trust in something beyond their understanding. I've seen it in the survivors who come to my office, people who gave their money, their children, their entire lives to charismatic leaders who promised divine truth and delivered only suffering. The methods change, but the underlying vulnerability remains the same. Sometimes I wonder if Brother Isaiah was really a historical figure, or just the name that something older and more primal chose to wear, something that feeds on the human need to believe, to find meaning, to trust in authority. All I know for certain is this: faith can be the most beautiful thing in the world, or the most dangerous. The difference is not in what you believe, but in whether you're willing to question it. And sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I find myself arranging small objects on my kitchen table, salt shakers, pencils, coins, without consciously meaning to. When I realize what I'm doing, I always scatter them immediately. But for just a moment before I break the patterns, I swear I can almost read what they're trying to spell. My name is Chris Westwood, and I've been a park ranger for 14 years. People call me Kronos because I'm always on time. I mean always. My watch is set to the second, and I check it every few minutes. It's a habit from my Navy days, when being late could mean life or death. I work in the Great Smoky Mountains in Tennessee, and I love every minute of it. The forests here are old and deep, full of secrets that most folks will never see. I know these mountains like my own backyard. I can tell you when the first snow will fall just by watching how the squirrels move. I track animal migrations down to the day. My reports are so accurate that other rangers joke I can see the future. But there's one place in my territory that's always bothered me: Echo Valley. It sits in a box canyon about 5 miles from the main trail with only one way in or out. The walls are steep and covered in thick pine trees that block out most of the sunlight. When you shout in that valley, your voice bounces back and forth for what seems like forever. The weird thing about Echo Valley is what's inside it. There's a whole settlement from the 1920s, perfectly preserved. Houses, a general store, even an old church with a bell tower. The story goes that a community of about 30 families lived there until 1920, when they all vanished overnight. No bodies were ever found, no signs of violence. They just disappeared. Most rangers avoid the place. They say it gives them the creeps. But I'm not the type to believe in ghost stories. There's always a logical explanation for everything. Animals get spooked by strange smells. Old buildings creak and groan. Shadows play tricks on your eyes. I've seen it all. That's why, when I got the report about Echo Valley last Tuesday, I wasn't worried, just annoyed. 3 hikers came through the visitor center today, my supervisor Tom Bradley told me over the audio. They claim they met people living in Echo Valley, said the folks were dressed like it was still 1920 and talked funny, real old-fashioned like. I rolled my eyes. Tom, you know how hikers are. They see what they want to see. Probably came across some history buffs doing a reenactment. That's what I figured too, Tom said. But here's the thing, Chris. They had photos. That got my attention. In my experience, cameras don't lie. People do, but cameras don't. I need you to hike up there tomorrow and check it out, Tom continued. Write up a report. If there really are people living in that old settlement, we need to know about it. It's federal land and camping without permits is illegal. I looked at my watch. It was 4:17 p.m. exactly. I'll head up first thing in the morning. Should be back by noon. Be careful, Chris. I know you don't believe in spooky stuff, but there's something about that place that ain't right. I laughed. Don't worry, Tom. The only thing scary about Echo Valley is how much paperwork I'll have to fill out if I find squatters. That night, I went through my routine like always. I cleaned my gear, checked my radio, and packed my backpack with military precision. Compass, first aid kit, water, energy bars, camera, notepad, and 3 pens. I always carry 3 pens because you never know when one might stop working. I set my alarm for 5 o'clock a.m. sharp. I wanted to reach Echo Valley by 8 o'clock, spend a few hours looking around, and be back at the station by noon for lunch. Everything planned out to the minute, just the way I like it. I had no idea that time itself was about to become my enemy. I started hiking at 5:47 a.m. The trail to Echo Valley isn't on any of the tourist maps, and for good reason. It's steep, rocky, and cuts through some of the thickest forest in the park. Most of it is barely wide enough for one person. Everything was normal for the first hour. Birds singing, squirrels chattering, the usual forest sounds. I kept a steady pace and checked my watch every 10 minutes. Right on schedule. At exactly 7:23 a.m., I reached the entrance to the valley. It's like walking through a door in the mountain. 1 second you're surrounded by trees, and the next you're looking down into this hidden canyon. The settlement sits at the bottom like something from a history book. That's when I first noticed something was wrong. My watch had stopped. I tapped the face and held it to my ear. Nothing. The second hand was frozen at exactly 7:23 and 16 seconds. In 14 years of hiking, my watch had never stopped working. It was a military-grade timepiece built to survive anything. I tried to tell myself it was just a dead battery, but the hair on the back of my neck was standing up. Something felt off about this place. The air was too still. The birdsongs from outside the valley had gone quiet. Even my footsteps sounded muffled and strange. I made my way down the narrow path into the canyon. The old settlement looked exactly like it did in the historical photos I'd seen. Wooden houses with covered porches, a blacksmith shop, a general store with painted signs advertising tobacco and penny candy. But as I got closer, I could see that everything was in perfect condition. The paint wasn't faded, the wood wasn't rotted, the metal wasn't rusted. After 35 years of weather and neglect, that was impossible. I pulled out my camera and took some pictures. At least, I tried to. The camera made clicking sounds, but the film advance wasn't working. I opened the back and found something that made my blood run cold. The film was completely white, not exposed to light white, old white, like it had been sitting in that camera for decades. I checked my radio next, static. Then I tried my compass. The needle spun wildly before pointing in a direction that couldn't be north. Nothing electronic or magnetic worked properly. But my wind-up emergency compass worked fine. So did my mechanical pencil and my old-fashioned notepad. It was like modern technology had suddenly become useless. I was writing down these observations when I heard voices. They were coming from the direction of the general store. 2 men talking in low voices. I couldn't make out the words, but the accent was different. Old-fashioned, like actors in movies from the 1930s. I crept closer, staying behind the cover of an old wagon. Through the store window, I could see 2 men sitting at a checkerboard. They were dressed in wool pants, suspenders, and white shirts with the sleeves rolled up. Their hair was parted in the middle and slicked down with pomade. One of them moved a checker piece and said, "Your turn, Ezra." The other man, Ezra, studied the board for a long moment. "You know, Jacob, I've been thinking about what Mary said yesterday, about the strangers coming through." Jacob nodded. "Strangers with strange clothes and stranger gadgets. Makes a man wonder. Wonder about what? About time, Ezra." about how it moves for some folks and stands still for others. I felt ice water in my veins. These men were talking like they'd been here all along, like they'd never left, like it was still 1920. I backed away from the window and bumped into something. I spun around and found myself face to face with a woman in a long dress and apron. She had kind eyes and graying hair pinned up in an old-fashioned bun. "You're not from around here, are you, young man?" she said in the same old-timey accent. My mouth went dry. I'm a park ranger. I'm investigating reports of people living in this valley." She smiled, but there was sadness in her expression. "Living? Is that what we're doing?" She looked around at the settlement. "I suppose that's one way to put it." "Ma'am, I need to ask you some questions. How long have you been here?" The woman's smile faded. "What year do you think it is, Ranger?" 1955, I said automatically. She nodded slowly. "Then we've been here for 35 years, though it feels like yesterday." She paused and looked at me with those sad, kind eyes. "Or maybe it feels like forever. Time moves different here. You'll understand soon enough." Before I could ask what she meant, she turned and walked away. I tried to follow her, but she seemed to fade into the shadows between the buildings. I looked down at my watch again, still stopped at 7:23 and 16 seconds. But something else was wrong now. My beard felt different. Longer. I rubbed my face and felt stubble that hadn't been there that morning. I'd shaved less than 3 hours ago. That's when I started to run. I made it about halfway to the valley entrance before I realized something was terribly wrong. The path looked different, older. There were ruts in the dirt from wagon wheels that hadn't been there on my way down. The vegetation was thicker, more overgrown, and the light was all wrong. When I'd entered the valley, it had been early morning with long shadows stretching across the ground. Now the sun was directly overhead, even though my watch still showed 7:23. I kept climbing, but the entrance seemed to get farther away with each step. It was like the valley was stretching, growing longer as I tried to escape. By the time I reached the top, I was exhausted and confused. I checked my beard again. Definitely longer. At least a day's worth of growth, maybe more. The entrance to Echo Valley was there, just like always. But when I stepped through it, expecting to be back in the normal forest, I found myself at the bottom of the valley again, standing in front of the general store, looking at the same two men playing checkers through the window. "Your turn, Ezra," Jacob said, moving the exact same checker piece. I ran to the window. Hey, you two! I need help!" They looked up at me with mild interest, like I was a bird that had landed nearby. "Another stranger," Ezra said calmly. "Seems upset," Jacob observed. "They always are at first." I pounded on the glass. "What's happening? Here? Why can't I leave?" The woman in the old-fashioned dress appeared beside me again. "Because time caught you," she said simply. "Same as it caught us." "That doesn't make sense. Time isn't something that catches people." "Isn't it?" She gestured toward the settlement. "Look around, Ranger. Really look." I did. And for the first time, I noticed details that shouldn't have been there. Newspapers on porches dated 1920, but they looked fresh. Gardens full of vegetables that should have rotted decades ago. Laundry hanging on lines that should have fallen apart from weather and age. "We've been living the same day for 35 years, the woman continued. October 15th, 1920. The daytime came hunting. "Time doesn't hunt people," I said, but my voice sounded weak even to me. "Doesn't it? Think about your life, Ranger. Always checking your watch. Always worried about being late. Always trying to control time. What if time got tired of being controlled?" That's when I heard the sound. It was like wind, but deeper. Like breathing, but huge. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, echoing off the canyon walls. The woman's face went pale. "It's coming. It's feeding time." "What's coming?" Before she could answer, a shadow fell across the settlement. Not the shadow of a cloud or a bird. This shadow moved wrong. It flowed like water, but sharp like broken glass, and it was hungry. I watched in horror as the shadow touched a man walking between the buildings. He was young, maybe 20, wearing hiking boots and modern clothes like mine. One of the missing hikers, I realized. The shadow wrapped around him like smoke. The man opened his mouth to scream, but no sound came out. Instead, I watched him age. His hair went gray, then white. His skin wrinkled and sagged, his back bent. In the space of 10 seconds, he went from 20 to 90. Then he crumbled to dust. Time, though.
If, the woman whispered. It feeds on years, decades, whole lifetimes.
The shadow turned toward me. I could feel it looking at me, even though it didn't have eyes. I could feel it wanting my time, all the years I had left. I ran. Behind me, I heard the woman calling out, "The church! Get to the church bell!" I didn't understand what she meant, but I ran toward the white wooden church at the far end of the settlement. The shadow followed, flowing over buildings and around corners like spilled ink. I could feel it getting closer. My legs felt heavy, like I was running through water. Every step was harder than the last. The shadow was stealing my energy, my speed, my time. I reached the church and threw myself through the door. Inside, it was cool and quiet. Sunlight streamed through simple glass windows. There were wooden pews and a small altar with a cross, and in the corner, a rope hanging down from the bell tower above. I grabbed the rope and pulled with all my strength. The bell rang out across the valley, deep and clear and powerful. The shadow stopped just outside the church door, writhing like it was in pain. The bell rang again, and again. "That's it," I heard the woman's voice from outside. "Keep ringing. It can't stand the sound." I kept pulling the rope. Each time the bell rang, the shadow pulled back a little more, but I could feel myself getting weaker. My beard was definitely longer now. Gray streaks were showing in my hair. The thing was still feeding on me, even if it couldn't get close. "How long do I have to keep this up?" I shouted. "Until sunset," the woman called back. "It only hunts during the day." I looked out the window. The sun was still high overhead. I'd been in this valley for hours, but my watch still showed 7:23. Time was broken here, twisted into something unnatural, and I was trapped in it, just like everyone else. I rang that bell until my arms felt like they were going to fall off. The shadow circled the church like a hungry wolf, always looking for a way in. But the bell kept it back. As the day wore on, people from the settlement gathered outside the church. They looked up at me with faces full of hope and fear. "Tell me what happened here," I called down to the woman. "The truth this time." She was quiet for a long moment, then she said, "My name is Mary Hutchins. This was my home. Our home. We were a good community. God-fearing people who worked hard and took care of each other. What changed?" "Time came to collect what was owed," said a man I hadn't seen before. He was tall and thin, with wild gray hair. "I'm Pastor Williams. I was the preacher here. Still am, I suppose." "People don't owe time anything," I said, still pulling the bell rope. "Don't they?" Pastor Williams pointed to the settlement around us. "Look at this place. We tried to stop time. We wanted our perfect little community to last forever. We made clocks that ran slow. We ignored the seasons. We refused to let our children grow up and leave." Mary nodded sadly. "We thought we could make time stand still, keep everything just the way it was. But time doesn't like to be stopped." "So it came hunting," I said, understanding starting to dawn. "It came as a shadow first," Pastor Williams continued, "creeping around the edges of the valley, taking a day here, a week there. We barely noticed it first, but it got stronger, hungrier. And on October 15th, 1920, it took everything," Mary finished. "Trapped us all in this one day. We've been living it over and over for 35 years. I felt the rope burning my hands, but I kept pulling. There has to be a way to stop it." "There is," said a new voice. I looked down and saw Jacob from the general store. "But you're not going to like it." "Tell me." "Time feeds on time," Jacob explained. "The only way to satisfy it is to give it what it really wants, not stolen years, freely given ones." The shadow outside the church seemed to pulse at his words, like it understood. Someone has to sacrifice their remaining time, Pastor Williams said quietly. All of it, willingly. That's the only way to break the prison. I felt cold all over. You mean die? Yes, Mary said. But not just die. Give up every year you have left. Let time take it all at once. That much freely given time might be enough to satisfy it, to make it move on. I kept ringing the bell, but my mind was racing. I was 38 years old. If I lived a normal life, I might have 30 or 40 years left, maybe more. But these people had been trapped for 35 years, living the same day over and over, never aging, never changing, never free. What happens to you if I do it? I asked. We don't know, Mary admitted. Maybe we age all at once and die. Maybe we just fade away. Maybe we finally get to move on to whatever comes next. But we'll be free, Pastor Williams added. Free from this endless day. The sun was starting to get lower in the sky. I could feel the shadow getting impatient, pressing closer to the church. There's something else, Jacob called up. If you do this thing, if you sacrifice your time, the valley will be empty. No one else will get trapped. The creature will move on, looking for another place to hunt. I thought about all the hikers who might come through here in the years ahead, all the people who could get caught like I had been caught. I thought about Tom back at the ranger station, probably wondering why I hadn't checked in. I thought about my life, 14 years of hiking these mountains, keeping people safe, protecting the wilderness. Maybe this was just another part of the job. All right, I said, my voice hoarse from shouting over the bell. I'll do it. I let go of the rope. The bell fell silent. The shadow rushed toward the church like black water through a broken dam. But instead of running, I walked outside to meet it. I give you my time, I said loudly. All of it. Every year I have left. Take it freely given, and let these people go. The shadow wrapped around me like cold fire. I felt it pulling at my life. My years. My future. But instead of fighting it, I let it happen. I felt my hair go white, my back bend, my skin wrinkle and age. But I also felt something else. Peace. The shadow was satisfied. For the first time in decades, it was truly full. The people of the settlement watched as I gave up my life for theirs, as my remaining years flowed into the hungry darkness. And then, just before everything went black, I saw something beautiful. The shadow was dissolving, fading away, moving on. Time was free to move forward again. I woke up in a hospital bed 3 days later. Tom was sitting in a chair beside me, looking worried and relieved at the same time. Chris, thank God. We found you collapsed at the entrance to Echo Valley. You've been unconscious for 72 hours. I tried to sit up, but my body felt wrong. Old, tired. I looked at my hands and saw an old man's hands, spotted with age, veins standing out blue under paper-thin skin. What happened to me? I whispered. Tom's face was grim. The doctors don't know. They say you've somehow aged 20 years in 3 days. They've never seen anything like it. I reached up and felt my face. Wrinkled. My hair was white as snow. The valley, I said. What about the valley? We searched it top to bottom after we found you. Nothing there but old buildings. No people, no signs that anyone's been living there. Tom leaned forward. Chris, what really happened up there? I wanted to tell him. About Mary and Pastor Williams and Jacob. About the shadow that fed on time. About the sacrifice I'd made to set them free. But who would believe a story like that? I'm not sure, I said finally. I remember entering the valley and then... nothing. Tom nodded, but I could see he didn't believe me. The strange thing is, we found some old photographs scattered around the settlement, pictures of people from the 1920s, but their Wumkien has something weird about them. What? They looked peaceful, like they were finally at rest. Tom pulled out a manila envelope. I brought them, in case they help you remember. Looked at the photographs. There was Mary, smiling in a way she never had in the valley. Pastor Williams, with his arms around a group of children. Jacob and Ezra, no longer trapped at their endless checker game. They looked free. There's one more thing, Tom said. We went through the valley with every piece of modern equipment we have. Radios, cameras, watches, compasses. Everything worked fine. But when we brought in some old mechanical devices, wind-up clocks and such, they all stopped working. I smiled despite everything. Time moves forward there now. The mechanical things can't keep up. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing, I said. Just thinking out loud. The doctors told me I had maybe 6 months to live. My body had somehow aged 20 years in 3 days, and the shock was too much for my system to handle. I spent those months writing, filling notebook after notebook with the true story of what happened in Echo Valley. Not for publication, not for the official record, just so someone would know. So someone would remember Mary Hutchins and Pastor Williams and all the others who'd been trapped in time for 35 years. I died on a Tuesday in December, exactly 6 months after my encounter with the time thief. Tom was with me at the end. Any regrets, Chris? He asked. I thought about the years I'd lost, about the life I'd never get to live. No, I said honestly. I spent 14 years protecting these mountains and the people who visit them. In the end, I guess I just protected a few more. After my funeral, Tom had Echo Valley declared off-limits to hikers. He told his superiors it was due to unstable geology and dangerous wildlife. The real reason was that sometimes, on quiet mornings when the wind was just right, he could hear the sound of clocks ticking in perfect harmony. Time was moving again in Echo Valley, but it would always remember what had happened there. And maybe, just maybe, if you listen carefully in other remote valleys across the mountains, you might hear something that sounds like breathing, something that sounds like hunger. Time, it seems, has many thieves, and they're always looking for new hunting grounds.